Where do you go for Juma?
It depends. I go teach my shit always.
Oh, you do? All right.
So I kind of rotate in this area.
That's cool.
Yeah, on the days that I have to go to work, there's usually like it's like a short Juma, like in one of the city buildings, and it's just convenient.
You work at where? LA City?
Yeah, so it's like
yeah, I
but
think so. I've been there. Yeah,
but the problem is like it's not really like any amount. It's just like people rotate.
yeah.
So the khutbahs can be. I mean,
Yeah.
I applaud their effort, but like,
Alhamdulillah.
but like, I'm not. You know, it's just the hard part is just like some of the brothers, like the older like uncles, like have like a very soft spoken voice, and I'm like trying hard to stay awake because it's like I made the mistake of having lunch before Shema, and I was like,
see, that's why I make my voice like kind of like go up and down. You know, I let you nap for a minute, and then I come crashing down on you
Wake you up.
like a riptide. You know what I mean? You thought you was cool out on the ocean, just chilling, and then boom, like a riptide come and get you.
yeah, I'm just,
you know?
I was like, oh my god, this is so rude. Like I just drink coffee before the khutbah because. I mean, like I said, I applaud their effort, but like it's just sometimes like
No,
it's
it's
hard.
such thing
It's
as
just
Shake
hard.
NyQuil.
Yeah.
I think you talk.
Oh, I've had my fair share over the years too, man. Trust me. There's some people that put me right out.
That verbiage.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Some of
it's
the
so funny.
some of the best sleep of my life. It's unfortunately been during a few khutbah. Since I became imam, my sleep has gone down because I got to give the khutbah. That's why I look so bad, man. I'm not getting no sleep no more. I go to Juma, I'm like, wait a minute, I got to give the khutbah.
Yes.
Do you memorize your, like, how do you know?
What is my
Like-
process?
Like, do you like have I know you like prepare a topic and research stuff like that, but like when you actually go through a script or something of what you're gonna say, or
Just, when I first started giving khutbah, I was so nervous. I still am sometimes, but before I was like stage fright almost kind of, right?
Right.
So I would, my ex-wife can tell you, man, I would write a Bible like of notes, you know what I mean? It would just be on and on and on. She's like, you're only going to be talking for like 20 minutes, right? So I used to go crazy, now not so much anymore. As a matter of fact, I used to all week long, I would do all this prep. Now I try to just make sure during the essentially Saturday through Thursday, I read a lot just in general. I mean, of course, I try to read a lot of Koran, other sources, just period. I just try to read as much as I can so that my brain is always kind of stimulated and I'm always thinking. And then I also try, that's what it is. One of the reasons why I also do record this stuff is that so I can go back and I can, okay, well, what did I say last week? Because I kind of take the approach of back when I used to be a musician, like when you were playing at least in a group, right? When whoever got finished with their solo, it was always a complimentary that if you come in, you begin your solo kind of like where they left off. Like either you would do a play on the riff or something, right? So I was like, well, I'll just riff on myself. So I try to usually take where I left off, even if I'm going to go in a different direction, to bridge it. That way, if you come here, like most people that come here every week.
right.
They might on occasion go somewhere else, but then at least if you do come here every single week, then you get a greater sense of continuity, And I think that's important because otherwise, when you go to the masjid, especially I try to look at it from the viewpoint of the average Muslim, that this may be the only time that they come not only to the masjid during the week, but the only kind of religious instruction they may get.
Right. It's true. I mean,
No, I'm just saying. It's I'm not whipping on nobody. It's just that's what it is. I realize that people are busy and other things, and for whatever reason. So if that's what the reality is, so I try to operate and deal from reality. So that way, And I've had people tell me that actually, I think that's why a lot of people come. It's not so much that the khutbah that I give is like so stupendous, but it's like, oh, there is this, like I can follow it along week after week, and I feel like I'm learning something, you know. Or sometimes I'll stay on a topic for 2 or 3 weeks, but I'll expound on it in different areas so that they all kind of connect together. So, you know, most people have felt like, okay, you know, when it does that, I feel like I'm kind of more connected and so on and so forth. So I try to do that. But in terms of like the actual, so I don't do anything until the morning of. So, you know, I wake up, take my kid to school, and then come here usually around say 9 or 10 o'clock. And then I just kind of briefly look over what I did last week, you know, then I kind of begin to redact, you know, and think about, well, okay, what is the main theme of today? I try to do it kind of thematically. And then I'll like sketch out maybe like 1 or 2 verses. I mean, I used to get like, you know, 10, 15 verses and, you know, 10 hadith, and that's too much, man. Nobody, people, I will become Sheikh Al-Nyquil. Yeah, that will definitely put people to sleep if you get, I think, too in depth. And that's a mistake that I see some, you know, some people who don't have an experience in oration. So I also I used to talk for a living. I mean, I used to be a radio DJ for NPR. I used to spin jazz. I used to do the news. So you can't get on the air and be like, that was Miles Davis. Cool. Well, next. You can't talk like that, right? You have to learn to orate. You have to learn how to speak and be concise and be a little bit engaging. So I think also if I hadn't worked in radio, I don't think I would be able to be as effective as at least as a khatib giving, you know, because most people say like, oh, I really enjoy your khutbah, but I'm like, it's just compared to the other imams, it's not that I have any special knowledge. We all have access to the same stuff. It's just that most of them don't know how to speak. They're knowledgeable, but they don't know how to construct their thoughts into sentences and phrases in which is engaging, even their body language. You know, like I try to look at the audience and engage, or, you know, people say like they feel like, oh, I feel like you're talking to me. That's important. I wish that more of the khatibs and imams and whatnot, I wish that they would get some, you know, I wish they would get some training in that field. But sadly, they don't.
Historically, you know, I try not to blame them too much because they were filling a niche at the time.
Yeah.
But filling the niche just becomes a problem because you're not taking ownership of it. So there's no need to learn any new skills or anything else. It's like, you know, if you're helping someone on the weekend to do something, you're not going to go to school and learn how to do it.
Right.
You kind of just, you know, so it's not, so, you know, we're dealing in a circumstantial problem. But I mean, this generation now, I'm like, there's no excuses anymore.
Right.
We're like second generation, you know, send your kids somewhere to learn this and get it.
Yeah.
And sit down somewhere, uncle. Right?
No, I really.
No, I should just say doctor, right? You know, just do, you know, you did your responsibility, you know, because it was needed. We needed it,
but no, there is I think that's that's one of the fallbacks, even though we're tangential from. But I think it's important to note, like, you hear all this talk about traditional Islam, right? And learning traditional Islamic knowledge. All right, great. Learn plenty of traditional Islamic knowledge. I did, you know, I could stand to learn some more. However, none of that is going to do very good if you don't know how to convey it.
Right.
And the vast majority of mashayikh and asatid and all these other titles, you know, they don't have any training in education, and they don't have any training in public speaking. I think that's one of the things, not to always seem like I am a big fan of Dr. Jackson. Just unapologetically, I love Dr. Jackson. He's, I've known him for, 20, almost 30 years. And I will throw some shade on him and say that one of the reasons why Dr. Jackson is such an enigmatic and engaging person, yes, he has a towering intellect, but there's also plenty of smart people in the world, right? But clearly, he's also a cut above in terms of his intellectual prowess, but that isn't only it. Sherman is also he's a vocationally trained educator, right? What he does to earn his money is not only be smart or be popular or have traditional Islamic training, right? I mean, he's a university professor and he's been teaching, for, as long as some people have been alive, right? He's been doing this for probably a solid 30 years, right? And he was professionally trained, right? I mean, he went, and that's part of what he does. That's what he does at USC. He teaches. So he's able to take the knowledge that he has and give it to people because he is trained as an educator. He's also trained as a researcher. So that's why his scholarship seems like, wow, most people are not trained as researchers. I think another person I'll throw a little shade on, he probably won't appreciate it, but is Joe Bradford. Joe Bradford, Sheikh Joe, is a really good friend of mine. And what I really like about Joe is that he's a great researcher, and he's a good teacher that I think makes Joe, sometimes people are like, oh, he's very, he's not a popular speaker in the terms of he's not gonna entertain you, right? He's gonna teach you. And Joe knows his stuff. I mean, he has degrees and he's trained. And so when I see people like these, they stand out from the crowd because of some vocational skill they have in addition to just simply classical, traditional Islamic knowledge. I'm not going to mention any names, but there's some people that are trained like that. And I'm like, I cannot listen to them because it's just, they're all over the place. I'm just being honest that they could be more effective if they went. And so therefore, as we move forward in our community, professional development, when are we going to make it a requirement that, okay, you want to become an imam? That's a wonderful, fine thing to become. When are you going to, when is that going to, when are you also going to go and get some kind of actual training in how to teach? I don't care what you know, right? I mean, I do care what you know, but knowing what you know ain't enough, right? And you can't always just operate on raw natural talent, right? So, for me, like I have a somewhat of a background in education because I did my degree in English Lit, and then I also taught for years. I mean, even though I taught other subjects, I mean, even before Islamic studies, right? I taught web design. I taught front end web development and other things. So I have a background just in education. I know how to make a lesson plan. I know how to read somebody when there doesn't seem like they understand it. I have experience trying to take complicated things and break them down to compartments too. So, that probably isn't what you asked.
No.
But I think that's why we do need, we need a greater level of professionalism so that those people that have acquired all of that wonderful special knowledge can put it to use and make it diffuse more, So I have to ask the question I ask every week. What did we do last week? Did we do anything last week? I don't even remember.
I remember being here.
Yeah. So we're continuing just to explore the idea of of morality, obligation, and I had said last week, it's also important to have a measure of kind of pump the brakes a little bit. I mean, I've been using this word paradox, right? You remember the idea? What is paradox? I keep bringing this word up a lot because I say it's in order to really understand so many things in Islam, you need to have a measure of paradox. I mean, things that might seem to what? Contradict each other, right? Right. Orthodox and paradox that come from doxy, right? Opposing beliefs, or you could say normative belief. So I gave one example in the halaqah last night, right? There's the famous hadith we all know where the Prophet ﷺ said what? La taghdab. What? Do not get angry. But the Quran actually says when you get angry. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, don't get angry. But the Quran says, well, when you do get angry, فَإِذَا مَا غَضَبُوا هُمْ يَغْفِرُونَ. And when they do become angry, they forgive one another. Does this mean that the hadith is contradicting the Quran? Your silence is stunning. No, but I mean, it's a real question, right? Some people will say, you'll hear all the time, don't get angry, don't get angry, don't get angry. Okay, it's true. We should all try not to get angry. But being that we're also all human beings, or at least I'm pretty sure most of us are human, we are going to get angry. So what do we do when we become angry, right? So by having a paradoxical view, right, what might seem to be opposing beliefs, or at least opposing statements, is that Islam is a very broad and encompassing way of living. And that's going to have to include all of the frailties of the human condition, which is, on one hand, you aspire to not, right? You aspire to not get angry. So the statement of La Taghdab comes from the inspirational figure, from the Prophet ﷺ. So we look up to him, we aspire to be like him, and therefore his advice is inspirational. In fact, a lot of, you will see in the Quran, it often describes, revelation as what? Wahi, right? That it's inspiration. So he is an inspirational figure for us, and we do our best to live up to him. But then it says, however, if you do happen to get angry, right? وَإِذَا مَا غَضَبُوا هُمْ يَغْفِرُونَ. But however, when they do get anger, right, they forgive. So you have to allow for both. It's not that, well, the Quran says this, so we discount the hadith. No, right? Because if we discount the hadith, right, the hadith is important because it's giving us something to achieve and aspire to. The Quran is just saying when you do happen to, right, become, take it easy, fall back, be forgiving, right? But the Prophet ﷺ gives us something to aspire for, a trophy, something to, to compete and achieve for. This is like many things throughout Islam that we'll find that is necessary. Like for just in the same thing about avoiding sin, right? On one hand, we should definitely avoid sin as much as we can. However, the same verse says, وَالَّذِينَ يَجْتَنِبُونَ كَبَائِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَالْفَوَاحِشِ. Those, right, that they make the best effort to avoid the kaba'ir al-ithm, the major sins. This is an interesting admission of the Quran. It's not just saying about avoiding sin. It says what? Avoiding the major sins. Now, it doesn't mean, hey, minor sins are, it's 2 for 1 today. Let's go 2 for 1 sale on minor things. No, but it's giving us that essentially at the base, there is like this mercy and compassion and understanding about the human condition, and it's realistic about what we're going to be able to achieve. that's what I mean by having a somewhat paradoxical view. Yes, we should avoid sin as a general precept. But it's saying, look, those that avoid the major sins, right? The minor ones, okay, you ask Allah for forgiveness, you're forgiven. The major ones, just try to avoid those, and al-fawahish, right? Fahisha, those things that are like just repugnant. That gives a different idea on what it means to live as a human being. Because some of us beat ourselves up so much. I'm not saying that, leave a little slack in your life so you can sin. I'm not saying, right? It's not what I'm suggesting. I am saying, though, leave a little slack in your life when inevitably, to the best of your ability, you still wind up sinning, right? At least just try to avoid the major ones, right? And similarly, Draz points to the verse in Surah At-Taghabun, the 64th chapter. He says, where Allah says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, right? Have taqwa, right? Which means protect yourself against Allah's displeasure. Ma istata'atum, as much as you are able to do so. Which means that sometimes you're not going to do it. Right? You give your best effort, and sometimes you don't do it. Like every day I ask my kid to pick up her toys off the floor and clean up her room, and to the best of her ability, there's always still something on the floor. But I can see earnestly in her face, she's really trying. In fact, she comes out and be like, Dad, look at my room. I'm like, yeah, it's better. In that same way, right? So this is important for understanding morality and obligation, because if we set up the rules of engagement or the rules of the game in such a way that it does not factor in our ability to be weak and to fail, to be tempted, then we're going to make a very inhumane way of practicing Islam that just simply isn't going to work, because it's not actually flying on the rails, right? That is here in the system. And then it's continued by, wasma'u wa ati'u, right? Listen and obey, right? So protect yourself from Allah as much as you are able. Listen and obey. Wa anfaqu khayran li anfusikum, right? And give for your own benefit. Again, going back to this idea of decentering yourself. So morality, while we do have an objective, I'm not saying there isn't an objective morality. Somebody asked that, I don't know if it was last week or online, or somebody had asked, is there an objective morality in the Quran? Absolutely, right? There is absolutely an objective morality. The thing is, the objective morality of the Quran includes a merciful insulation and padding so that we will not hurt ourselves. Right?
Like clear cut, you mean? Or what do you mean objective?
It is clear cut, right? Like, la taqrabu zina. Don't even approach fornication. That's pretty clear cut, right? And try to avoid the major sins. But then even what? Inna Allaha yaghfiru dhunuba jami'an. Allah forgives all sins. That is not an invitation to approach fornication. It's just simply, it's a paradoxical view that builds into the system ideals and directions of which you should clearly go. As-sirat al-mustaqim, right? The idea of it literally a sirat, a tariq, a path, that's the direction you can go. You should go in. Go in that direction. But you may, going in that direction, it's like in your car. I mean, you may get distracted, or the GPS might give you some bad directions, and you might, just because you're going in the right direction doesn't mean there aren't going to be some bumps. This is what has to be understood about morality, that it is black and white, but it isn't a razor's edge. You know what I mean? It is merciful, but it is also clear cut. So, when most people come, I always say, when most people come and ask me a question, is such and such halal, is such and such haram? I'm like, are you really asking this, or are you wanting me to assuage your guilty conscience about something? Because 9 times out of 10, you already know that. I mean, on some occasions, like, I get it. That's why, like, especially Joe, I like what, Joe Bradford does with all of these questions about, finance and stuff, because especially so-called Islamic finance is definitely more of a murky area, because it's very little of it is explicit in the Quran, right? Especially on the idea of contracts. And then, of course, most people are not that familiar with the hadith. And then a lot of that is extrapolation and whatnot. So what he does is, he definitely helps to, people and answer questions that truthfully they may not, know. But outside of that, a lot of the questions that I get, it's like, come on, that this is not permissible. Why are you asking me this? So yes, morality is black and white. However, we are not black and white, right? We have limits. Like, we literally, I mean, that statement, fattaqullaha mastata'tum, right? Have taqwa of Allah to the best of your ability, means that even our ability to be pious and obedient has limitations built into the system. We will only ever be able to achieve a certain level, some of us higher than others, but nobody will ever be so-called perfect. As I mentioned, in the halaqah last night, even the word, ihsan from ahsana, right? The form of af'ala, if we say something is hasan, because that's the root, hasan means what?
Good or
Yeah, good. And therefore, ihsan means what? Now, how is it popularly translated as?
Perfect.
Yeah, perfection. But what is actual ahsana means what? Better than good, right? Better, right? There's good and then there's better. So the idea of to do, like, the person who is a muhsin is a person who's better than a person who's simply good. Like, striving, going beyond, pushing yourself, right? Trying to always achieve the next level, the next echelon, whatever. Part of our language is our language is part of our problem. Perfection. This is kind of an alien word, to be quite honest. You will not find this, because it's unknowable. And if it's unknowable, what use is it, right? Allah is knowable. We don't know everything about Allah, and our knowledge of Him can never encompass Him. He encompasses everything else. At the same time, Allah is knowable. Right? Even though I don't see Him, right? I know, how else did all this stuff get here? It's beyond, I was arguing with some stupid atheist the other day about, it's like even the second law of thermodynamics, right? I was like, man, just submit. I get it that you may not like the idea that there is a God, and that's fine. You just go ahead and wrestle with that. But if you want to tell me that all this stuff got here just by, I said, I don't have enough faith for your atheism, right? I don't. I just that requires more faith than I have. Faith in Islam, yes. Faith in that just all this just showed up by itself, not possible. So, we have to really be a little bit more broad in our understanding of morality, that it is black and white. Right? Pray. It's a straight up, the man says so many times, pray. Okay, there's no doubt about the necessity of prayer. However, we may, from time to time, just be weak because human beings are made weak. So the real question is, then why is morality such a hard thing? And why are y'all leaving me to eat this Turkish delight by myself? Why is morality so hard? Why do you think morality is so hard for people?
Individually or socially?
See, that actually leads into what my point is. Why is it so hard for us? Maybe it's not hard for you guys. You guys are awliya.
The temptations.
Hmm?
The temptations of.
Okay, but I'm tempted all the time. Probably shouldn't be putting this out on the live stream, but Imam is tempted all the time. I am. I'm a human being. I'm a man. I like women. I see beautiful women all the time. I live in Southern California. They usually have very little clothing on most of the time. I'm going to be tempted all the time. That's just reality. What prevents me from fulfilling or indulging in those temptations? I'll put myself on the stand, right? What is it that keeps me? Is it just because I'm an imam? I have magical powers of morality and of obligation and duty? He's shaking his head. Yes, no, that's actually not the case. I do not have magical powers. Is it just that my iman is so strong?
I think we place greater motivation on our fear of punishment versus the reward of engaging in that, maybe.
Well, there's that. I mean, true. I mean, I'm not saying I don't have any iman. I am an imam. I have a little bit of iman. Right. So, yes, I do fear punishment in the hereafter, but that ain't the only way that it all comes about. How else am I able to, control myself? How are you able to control yourself? Well, here's a little hint. Most of us that have some kind of regular group affiliation, part of what keeps us from doing some things is that we would be embarrassed of other people finding out.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. Now, that may not seem like the most pious and purely intentioned thing, but that's one of, I would say, one of the residual blessings of being in the jama'ah, of being in the group, is that you are not left up only to your individual strengths or weaknesses, but you gain strength from the group, even if it's just that I don't want other people to find out that I did that, or that, oh man, for a minute you think, like, oh no, that wouldn't be bad. And so there is an influence that the group exerts over the individual that helps them conform. Now, typically, in this day and age, words like conformity are often what? Negative and demonized. Oh, you're conforming. We all conform to something, right? What is wrong with conforming to the group? Right? It's a particular Western, in my opinion, malady, right? A kind of sickness of hyper individualism. I mean, we're all individuals. I'm an individual. I like my coffee a certain way. I like certain clothes. I like certain food. But, so I do have my own individual tastes. However, I am part of a group. Now, sometimes when you're in like this leadership position, people forget, like, no, I mean, I'm an imam. The imam, there is no imam without a jama'ah. There's no imam without a group. Who are you leading? Right? So, my long-winded point is that the group confers not only conformity upon us, which it helps, sometimes we have that shame. We don't want to offend the morality of the group, but it also helps to give us the courage to withstand temptation, right? If me and Gennaro and Omar and you are all hanging out and like some really attractive woman comes by, not only am I not going to just not run over and fornicate, right? But I might even be more encouraged to just lower my gaze. Why? You don't think I find her attractive? No, I just said there's a fine woman that just walked by, right? But I'm going to be here with you guys and be like, man, look at that. It'd be like, I ain't praying behind this dude. This guy's out of his mind. What kind of imam is this, right? And even if I wasn't imam, right, you'd be like, man, what's up with this brother, man? He's a little, So I wouldn't want to. I would want to appear, right? And this we have to be honest. Again, a little bit paradoxical. I wouldn't want to appear to be immoral. That doesn't mean when I see fine girl walking down the street, it doesn't register on my senses of that's a fine woman, right? The group helps me to attenuate my responses in the way that are appropriate and that will most importantly what? Be pleasing to Allah. We have, I think, made an overindulgence on individualism to the point where we have even, when it comes to our Islam, it's viewed as kind of like a personal Olympics of piety and morality. What we forget is, I said in the khutbah yesterday and again last night, the truth is, and I've known a few Olympic athletes actually, they don't get to where they're at through some act of individual athleticism and heroism. They get there through what? Training. Well, you don't train by yourself. You train with who? A trainer. And most team, like especially you get to that level, I mean, you got like assistant coach and trainer and water boy and blah, 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 right? And then you also have your teammates. Sometimes you will be competing with each other for the same medal, but at the same time, you're encouraging each other too. So that's kind of like, that verse in Surah Al-Mutaffifin, وَفِي ذَلِكَ يَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ, right? That the pious people, they compete for the hereafter. Not all competition has to be bad. That means what? I'm going to bring out the best in you, you bring out the best in me, but I also am going to, I'm going to encourage you to do the best you can. This is the genius of the group, right? And we see this in what I call the inspired animals, right? Those non-human creation that Allah often talks about them being inspired, like the bees and like the ants. And we see that these stupid little insects on their own, completely useless. But in a group, they do things that we don't even understand, right? I mean, bees make architecture, right? I mean, an ant might make a tunnel, and that's kind of neat, right? But bees literally make, right, honeycomb. That's a shape that is not found in nature, right? And they literally build architecture. That's, to me, unbelievable. That doesn't come from any one individual bee. That comes from the hive collective. The hive has a queen, but then everybody else works together, and there's a genius, right, that comes. Again, we often demonize hive or collective thinking. And yet nowadays, right, why do we have such powerful computers, right? Why do our computers have such powerful computing ability? What's up in even those, actually, it was when I was flying in the clouds a couple months ago, I didn't actually see any computers, the cloud computing. I was like, we're in the clouds. Where's the cloud computing, right? We have this thing called cloud computing, which is the idea of what a bunch of computers daisy chained together, combine their computing power to be more powerful. So even, one computer isn't that amazing, but you daisy chain maybe 10 or 100 of them together, they can do all these amazing things, right? There's these, what we call sunan. There's these laws or ways that Allah has constructed for us to see and to know Him by, to be inspired by, and to think about how to live our lives by. And one of those is the group and the collective is always going to have a greater genius than any individual. I mentioned that, you look at somebody like Albert Einstein, amazing intellect, right? I mean, mathematically writes things that I can't even begin to decipher or comprehend. And yet for all of his massive intellect, wasn't even sure if there was a creator, let alone that Allah is Allah. Because this is somebody that spends a little too much time by himself and is not part of a collective. And we see that the Prophet ﷺ was also, like, he was a family man, so there's a group. And then he had his companions, his ashab, right? So morality and the ability to conform to it and the ability to conform to the obligations that we have will never be able to really achieve the heights that they can if we're only doing it individually, right? It also has to be done in the collective. And that's why the Quran speaks in the vast majority in the plural when it's referring to it. Alladina, alladina, alladina amanu. Alaykum salam. You know, walladina amanu, or alladina yajtaribuna. You know, it speaks in the voice of the plural because that is where our greatest genius is going to come from, not from only individual raw talent or intelligence, but from collective genius. So I wanted to just add that as we talk about morality, and therefore for our children too. You know, we raise our kids. You know, I mean, you don't have any kids yet, but you know, we raise our kids, yes, to have morals and principles. What we often fail to understand is that their ability to internalize those morals and principles will be a lot easier and more effective if they have other kids around them that also kind of at least share those values. Now, there'll be some variance. I mean, some kids are naturally more, you know, obedient and pious. Others are more mischievous, right? But if it's in a group in general, it kind of levels out. And therefore, you give people the maximum chance and opportunity for morality and the pleasure of Allah, right? When it's only up to individual, then it becomes very problematic. So I like this hadith that Imam Malik relates in the Muwatta, even though it is mursal and there is some contesting over obviously its chain, but the message is sound and it can be confirmed through other ahadith. And it's that, you know, as shaitan yahumu bil wahidi wal ithnain, right? Shaitan becomes really concerned with the individual, bil wahid wal ithnain, and the duo. And the word that the Prophet ﷺ is attributed. Now, this, I think Al-Haythami lists this in one of his books, or either him or I forget. The book is called Al-Zawahid, meaning those things that they have ziyada, meaning that in hadith methodology, not to go too tangential, they're a normal hadith say that's like in Muslim or Bukhari, it's like, you know, the companion stated that the Prophet ﷺ said A, B, and C, right? Where sometimes there are some hadith that are not actually a statement of the Prophet. They're a statement perhaps of another companion, but the hadith compiler, for whatever reason, decided to just elevate it to the state that, well, no, it's not actually it's not the companion that said it, but the Prophet said it. So it has this artificial elevation, right? It's not that it's a bad statement necessarily, but there are some hadith that are like this. So anyway, there's a collection that deals with, you know, hadith that have this ziyada. But nonetheless, it can be corroborated in other ways. And it says that, again, that shaitan, he has himma. When we use this word himma, it means like you have like, you know, passion, you have interest. So like shaitan becomes passionately interested in the individual or in just two people, right? So I was like, you know, it's real easy to concoct some crazy stuff to get into while you're by yourself. It's very easy to be tempted and to capitulate to temptation when you're by yourself. It's also easy to come up with some stupid ideas when there's also just two of you, right? Like if I say, man, you know, maybe I'm broke, and I'm like, man, you know what? I'm gonna go around the store. I'm around the corner and rob this store because I'm broke. And if Samil is also broke, or if he's just my homie, and I'm like, hey, man, let's hit up the store around the corner, he might be like, okay, right? Is because shaitan takes an interest in these kinds of individual or groups, right? You can come up with all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Now, if we said this also to Omar, like, hey, me and Samil are going to go knock off the store. You want to join us? You'd probably be like, nah, man, I got to go to bed early tonight. Like you would come up with some excuse of like, or I don't think that's a good idea. Why don't you, come up with another solution to your problems, right? Because it says, فَإِذَا كَانُوا ثَلَاثَةً لَمْ يَهُمَّ بِهِمْ. How if there are three or more, then shaitan doesn't have this passionate interest in them, right? this passionate interest that Shaitan shows for us, it really manifests most when we are by ourselves, right? And that's where, again, morality and obligation, while we do have an individual responsibility to do them, our performance of them will always be kind of hampered, or we're relying on ourselves a little bit too much versus changing our thinking about the idea of groupthink and of conformity. That in this culture, those things are demonized. And yet also what's really funny is, you look, most people in this culture aren't happy either. So for all of their rugged individualism, a lot of people are also committing suicide and blowing all kinds of dust up their nose and all other kinds of things, and having children out of wedlock. And then those children grow up to be miserable people who don't feel loved, and so on and so on, right? It's also, morality it's a selfless act, right? I mean, I'm choosing not to indulge my sexual desires with whatever woman that walks by. That requires me to be selfless in some ways. The way that we tend to learn selflessness is often best where? In a group. How do we, that's why when we have children, when they're young, we like to take them to the playground, or put them in activities with other kids so they learn how to do what? Well, not just socialize. What are kids really bad at when they're real little with their toys? Sharing, right? Because kids are naturally not selfless. Kids are naturally very, very selfish, right? And in the same way, if we're going to mature spiritually and we're going to mature in terms of our morality, we will probably learn that best in a group setting versus only through rugged individualism. So when you hear these statements like, religion is the opioid of the masses, this is nonsense, right? Individualism is the opioid of the masses, right? Because it is what people are literally overdosing on and even killing themselves as a result of, right? So it will require some shifting on our thought of a lot of these these presumptions, these presuppositions, these things that it's handed to us by our culture, and they seep into our subconscious, and we think we're being great, wonderful, pious Muslims, which maybe we are. However, many of us, when it becomes, because I see another side of the community as imam, because when things inevitably break down, who do people come to? They come to the imam, right? So I see the real slice of life that's kind of all the BS is, it's like a haze filter is put on it. You cut right through it. And it's like most of these people, most of them, when it comes down to their faith that they're struggling with, which often includes some immorality that they're struggling with, it's because they're doing everything by themselves. They tend to be socially isolated. So morality is going to require group participation. But we have to be realistic. In participating in the group, life ain't going to be, the group is not going to be perfect. We have, we want the group to be perfect, even though we ourselves are not perfect. Again, these are unrealistic expectations, and also we have some issues of entitlement that we need to perhaps adjust or even get rid of. So that's what in this segment, just to drive home, since we've been talking all this stuff about morality. Now it's a little bit into like the sort of, well, what's the methodology of morality? The methodology, one of the important methodologies of living a moral life is to be around other like-minded people that at least have morality as a goal that they want to achieve, even if they aren't always doing it in every moment, right? None of us are doing it every single moment of every day. But if we come around each other and are in each other's lives enough, it will, at least as the Quran say, الَّذِينَ يَجْتَنِبُونَ كَبَائِرَ الْإِثْمِ. We can at least mutually work towards avoiding the major sins, and then, privately and so on, we deal with the minor sins. Any thoughts, questions? That was a very long monologue.
I was just thinking, like, from because of my industry, like urban planning, I think a lot about like the morning commute. Everyone talks about how they want to reduce traffic in the city, but nobody wants to take the bus. They don't want to take the train.
I would love to take the train.
It's just
Yeah.
like LA keeps building all these, they keep extending train lines. They keep ridership's going up. That's true, but like it's still like when I go on a train in New York, it's full, and when I go on a train here, there's always a seat. So it's like,
Oh yeah.
So going back to what you were saying about individual versus collective,
Yeah.
I think about traffic. How many people are
Yeah, that's a
in
good
their
analogy. Yeah.
cars like by themselves. Some people are carpooling, some people are in a van.
Yeah.
But there are way too many people.
I used to
driving along
love, I lived in Philly. I used to take the train to work
Yeah.
every day. And I loved it because it was the most non-stressful way of coming and going. I mean, yes, you couldn't pick up and just go at any time. You had to wait for it to come and so on. But at the same time, it's like once I submitted myself to that process, and that's what it was.
Right.
It was a lot more enjoyable. I didn't have to, because man, traffic here, dude, man, it's a good thing that I don't have any body cam on me, man, because sometimes I'm like, I'm like losing my stuff in traffic here. Yeah.
But it's interesting how many people I've talked to that also work downtown like myself. They live in areas where they do have access. Because I understand, like some areas, it's just not convenient for you to take the train or the bus.
Right.
I get that. But how many people have thought of that as an option? And you'd be surprised, like just talking to people, like, you have this option. If you don't like driving, you don't like spending money on gas, like, you have, but it's just, I guess some people prefer just to have that ownership or be by themselves, or like, this is my commute, this is my car. I just started thinking of it that way, as like, we're better together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's only due. It's a lot of it is due to, and when I say the West, I should actually really refine even more, particularly America.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because in Europe, even though they do have their individualism too, they do have a bit more of a collective mind in some ways. Yeah. I mean, just public transportation is one of them. Most European countries you go to, there is, very, very good public transportation. In America, we have taken the individual, which again, there's nothing wrong with groups are made of individuals, but we've taken it to kind of an absurdity, right?
Yeah.
And we see the, consequences of that throughout our culture and society. I mean, I think, obesity and a lot of other issues we have, environmental degradation, a lot of it comes from what? Individualism, right? Taken to an absurdity where you can get everything personally to go, your food, your coffee, like how, when I was a kid, I mean, we only went out to eat, man, if it was like somebody's birthday or maybe my parents' anniversary or, so it was very rare to like go out and eat, where now, I mean, people just eat out, all day long, right? But then we're massaged. Oh, well, you can get this vegan option and this organic option and and this is a recycled cup, even though we find out now like 90% of everything that's labeled recycled just goes right into the landfill anyway. It's kind of more of a marketing scheme. And it's because, it's like we think we can achieve, right? We think we can achieve a societal perfection through individualism that we could achieve through a group effort, but it just won't. And we just keep convincing ourselves with more marketing slogans. We'll do this. Trust me, if you don't submit to a group, which means kind of deferring some of your individual desires, then at some point, you're just not going to be able to go beyond a certain level of quality. I was fortunate growing up in the Detroit area to have met some Japanese exchange students when I was very young, and that's how I actually learned Japanese as a kid. Matter of fact, when I sold my car a couple of weeks ago, one person that was interested was this Japanese guy. So when he came and I started talking with him in Japanese, my wife was kind of like, what's going on here? So I was fortunate. And one thing about Japanese culture, and I'm not, every culture has its good and its bad. One of the good parts of Japanese culture is it's a shame culture. And the shame is rooted in not wanting to bring shame to not only the individual, but to the group.
Right.
And there is a de-emphasis on the individual and an emphasis on the group.
Yeah.
I was very, when I look at my life and like how I came into Islam and how I was groomed in a sense by Allah, even from a child, I really see that now, that holistic way. That was a very, very beneficial experience to be introduced to that culture and see that beauty, because it's very Islamic in some ways. I'm like, man, if the Japanese people ever become Muslim, then Yom al-Qiyamah is just right around the corner. Because what's the point? Because if they become Muslim, I don't think anybody will outdo them. It'll be a wrap. That's just my thinking. But that de-emphasis on the individual, and you saw how, how are they able to achieve what they achieve? Through, even though they do, they produce beautiful works of art. I mean, most people around the world revere Japanese culture and aesthetics, the food, the clothing, the art, everything. It's beautiful. Part of that comes from a de-emphasis of the individual, right? And our tradition, really, our religion, our tradition has that same component, but because we've been so influenced by secularism, which ultimately, right, the thing with secularism, I've been talking about atheism and secularism, online and social media over the last week. I mean, one of the biggest issues with it is that it makes the individual the ultimate and only arbiter of truth. This is massively problematic, right? For a religion that is going to ask us, right, to make God the ultimate arbiter, is going to ask us to make Allah the ultimate arbiter of truth and falsehood and so on. So anyway, I think you're right. I mean, that's a good analogy about traffic. And like you said, at some point, either you have to be willing to give up a few things to gain some things that are better for yourself and for everybody else, or
it's just funny. It's like I hear, working at the city, or even we talk about these things a lot. It's just like ways to get people out of their cars, and I'm like, well, there are options today, but people just aren't willing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Their transportation system is definitely not perfect, but it's just getting people into that mindset first, like.
Right. I mean, just the analogy of the traffic thing. It's not like everybody's saying you can't have a car.
Yeah.
But just imagine if you didn't use it all. Like I love my truck.
I love
my truck.
Yeah.
I take pictures of it and put it on social media. I love my truck.
Right.
I take pictures of it, movies of it in slow-mo coming out of the car wash. I love my truck, right? But I would love to be able to not have to drive it every single day.
Yeah.
Because let me tell you, man, when you're getting 14 miles to the gallon, it's painful, and also just the convenience. I mean, there's some days I would love to just be able to, take a bus or a train to go to and from work.
I don't know. It's like, You know, like you were saying, like, I'm a car enthusiast. I still drive a manual transmission in 2019, which a lot of I get the weirdest.
I love
looks.
stick.
And it's like I love doing that, but it's like at the same time for the day to day, like getting to work and back, I'm taking the train. As long as I have that option, I'm taking it, and it's just cheaper, more relaxing, and majority of people they don't really care about cars, so it's just like they just like that ownership of.
No, been so it's almost like it's a mythology we've been sold of the individual, right? We've been sold this as a cultural myth,
right?
That's the thing, though. The Koran, like with the Arabs of the 7th century, it came to challenge their notions and their mythologies, and for some people that was very painful, and for other people they were like, oh yeah. So it's going to require dealing with the ego too. Yeah. Our ego to be able to, again, doing the necessary work to demonize words like conformity, groupthink, because for some, those words have been so successfully propaganded and demonized against. The campaign against them has been very, very effective. And yet most people have really just been sold a bill of goods. They don't actually have the product. It's like, show me where this individualism has really, really made everybody happy. It hasn't. And they show most people that are in groups, which is why most religious people, the clinical scientific data shows, are happier than non-religious people, particularly those that are not affiliated. Am I saying you can't be happy at all? No, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying the data set as a larger data set shows, because that's one of the benefits you get.
So the one question I had, I wrote down because I was thinking about it before. It was like you mentioned that phrase, opioid of the masses.
Yes.
And like I've thought about it. That before. Like, why is that a bad thing? Like to me, it's kind of true, right? To me, but in a good way. Like it gives me comfort to deal with.
Yeah, number one,
experience like there is something else, even if it's, let's assume, like obviously we all believe it, but even if it's fake, right? But still, like we meditate, right? We don't just meditate.
Why do we watch TV? Why do we watch? I don't, right. But why do we watch Game of Thrones?
Right.
It's all fake. It's a make-believe, made-up story, and all of the graphics. They showed a picture the other day, the girl that's riding the dragon. When you actually see the behind the scenes where they have like the green screen, it's like, I couldn't actually imagine, how do you act that out? Like you're just on some dummy thing, and it's like I would be a very poor actor, right? I would not be able to pretend, enough. We get all kinds of benefit from things that are make-believe. Right. No, I'm not saying that, Islam is make-believe, but like you said, just to even indulge that critique, well, our society is all about make-believe. All people do is just watch crap on TV that 99% of it is all make-believe. And it's because it brings people some type of ease and pleasure. Is ease and pleasure, is that wrong? Right? Now, again, no, what we believe in is real. And even the idea of opioid. Well, people, what do opioids do? They relieve pain and suffering. Is there something wrong with alleviating pain and suffering? Right?
Who said that quote? Is that Nietzsche?
I think it was Nietzsche. I can look it up.
No, you don't have to, but I was just curious if he acknowledged that benefit of that.
Let me see if
everyone says it.
I think it was. It says right here. Religion is the opium of the masses is one of the most frequently paraphrased statements of German philosopher and economist Karl Marx. Right, it's from the original Die Religion ist das Opium des Volkes. My German is barely operational. But yeah, that idea of, people take drugs because they're in pain. I mean, why is it that when people are in pain, a drug is good, but if they're in emotional or spiritual pain, then it's bad? I don't, again, Karl Marx was just a miserable SOB. Just like Freud. Like, people take Freud serious. Like, dude was a freaking crackhead, cocaine addict. Like, I can't take anything seriously that this guy said. And yet, I mean, especially in the modern times, there's probably you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that's had more of an impact on our subconscious understanding than Freud, even though Freud is more of a fraud than anything else, right? But we have digested it as if it's mother's milk,
Just recently, like, there was this guy I know who hit their son, right? They thought he had some type of movement disorder, which they've been dealing with for years, right? But they got him genetically tested because it wasn't getting any better. And so it finds out that they just found out he has some degenerative rare disease that's only going to get worse.
Subhanallah.
And so it's like, and this guy reached the top of corporate America. Like, I mean, the top.
Sure.
Right? But he's like, despite all the material things, like he says, if it wasn't for like religion or anything like that, I would just blow my brains out. Like,
Absolutely.
I can't deal with it.
Absolutely.
And it's like,
absolutely. No. I mean, I think this is.
And that's like the ultimate test as parents, right? Like, your children. And so.
Yes.
But it happens to people. But in the absence of religion, it's like, man, I wouldn't want to deal with that. It's like,
of course not. And you see where people actually, that is what they do. The moment that life is not all Turkish delight and, mountains of cocaine and hookers or whatever it is, in the moment that it isn't all beautiful, that's it. I'm out of here, right? Religion is what gives us the capacity to have perseverance, to understand. Like, there is no mathematical, logical, or rational way to understand pain. No mathematical equation will help me understand pain. No logical argument will help me understand pain. No rational set of, forget about it. The only thing that can help me truthfully understand pain, when I say understand, I mean like, the pain is because my wrist is broken, or I'm not talking about understand why me, is religion, is understanding Allah. That is what's going to help me understand and then withstand and endure and keep a happy countenance, a happy, positive outlook, at least to be able to still, as we say, grin and bear it, right? Well, grinning is a form of smiling, right? When you grin and bear it, well, grinning is a form of smiling. I wrote on Twitter the other day, I forget exactly, how I had put it, but I said, nobody wants to live in a world nobody wants to live in an atheistic world, right? Atheism and secularism, like, particularly, I would say, atheism is an extension of secularism, right? But neither of them have an original idea that religion or religious people didn't come up with first, right? It has literally either copied or ripped off everything from religion, and that's why it often tries to speak in the same language as religion, And I wrote about art. I said, art. I'm trying to find the exact quote. I said, atheists and secularists amuse me. They love them some art, but refuse to acknowledge that all art comes from the intangible, right? Meaning the non-empirical, the non-scientific, right? And the irrational. When Monet painted something, all these people go and see a Monet, There's no rational reason why he did it. And his imagination is intangible. It's not accessible to the sensoria. It's not accessible to the empirical senses. Right? I said, what? It's inspired by non-empirical otherworldliness. And that's how we often describe a true masterful piece of art. We'll often use the world as a kind of otherworldly, even though, according to them, there is no other world, right? I said, and then you had this guy who's so-called ex-atheist, right, who was praising essentially that the Notre Dame had burnt down and that they should rebuild it as a museum, not as a church, because he's like he's an atheist now. And he said that it essentially he's saying that it was all BS. I said, the so-called BS is actually what inspired buildings like churches and mosques to be built in the first place, which is why they were so beautiful, which is why people admired them so much. And I said, and as with all works of art, atheism inspires nothing, and in fact, secularism doesn't have one original idea that it hasn't borrowed or ripped off from religion. I said, nobody wants to live, I said, trust me, nobody wants to live in an atheistic world. It would have no beauty. I said, a world where atheism reigns supreme would be a world in which all attempts at beauty would be at best counterfeit reproductions of religious concepts of beauty, and at worst, horrifyingly boring, right? I was like, trust me, nobody wants to live in a world that's ruled by atheism and secularism. And this is true. I'm sorry, but art is religious. Even in the field of art history and study, art is religious. When you walk into, even for myself, even though I ain't with all the Son of God and all that, you walk into a church, it has usually a feeling of some type of serenity to it, not akin to going into a beautiful masjid. Obviously, when I go to a masjid, I feel even more serenity because there's not statues of idols and all this other stuff. But nonetheless, you go into a church, when you go into one of these modern architectural buildings, like I was in Hayden Track. I don't know if you've ever been in Hayden Track, it's like in Culver City. There's this one spot in Culver City. It's called Hayden Track. Of course, they have to make some Fuferton type word or whatever. And they have this building. I showed you. It's like this. It looks like a waffle. It looks like somebody just stacked waffles on top of each other. I mean, it's just all this. And it's like you look at it. It's like, okay, well, there's that, and then there's the other one. You can just look up waffle building Hayden Track, and you'll see. While it might for a brief moment kind of I want to say waffle building. Yes. There it is. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Right. For a brief moment, you look at that and you're like, that's different. That's it. But trust me, nobody's going to have any kind of Zen, tranquil, sakina. You're not going to have any of that with that stuff, right? Because it's devoid of belief and of spirituality.
Yeah.
It's cold. I'm sure mathematically, whoever built it has probably got some mathematical equation behind it, but it's cold, right? Religion is warm, right? It is infused with warmth. And it's just, so I was like, nobody wants to live in a world of secularism and atheism. Even the atheists and secularists don't want to live in a world of no religion because they are incapable of coming up with beauty on their own. I know that will sound terribly polemic, but I'm sorry, but there is no concept of beauty without religion in general. That's why even people that hate Islam, when they see the Alhambra, they're like, wow. Or they see the Taj Mahal, they're like, wow, right? Or they even just see, they see the calligraphy. They're like, well, you can't help but appreciate it, even if you don't know what it says, even if you don't like Islam. You may not like, I've had this conversation. People that don't like Islam, don't like religion, they see the calligraphy and they're like, yeah, it's beautiful, right? You're not going to get that out of writing some mathematical equation of stars pulsating in another galaxy or something. It just doesn't confer and imbue the same level of the same level of beauty. So yeah, we have a lot of things that need to be unpacked, and a lot of things that need to be digested, and it is just, unfortunately, we live in a time of distraction and a time of isolation. So again, if you're spending all your time by yourself, or your other special little friend, and both of you have decided that the two of you are the safe sect and everybody else is a deviant, mubtadi'i, then you're going to probably suffer those consequences, right? But if you come together as a group, you'll just live a better life. You will live a much better life. So those are my thoughts.
There's these especially like these white supremacist guys. They talk a lot about like American values, which they kind of just mean whiteness. But you talked about like Japan and like these different places that have like a culture. Like there's like what's your take on like diversity, or like in like cohesiveness, and
Yeah.
what like a unified, because they talk about is diversity good? Well maybe if you have like a unified overriding vision that's uniting all that diversity versus just chaos,
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, I think when it comes to, in my personal opinion, a lot of this so-called resurgent white nationalism or white supremacy, I think is just a dying gasp. Animals usually most kind of dangerous when it's on its last leg. It's also because they are searching. This is where, our mindset has been so influenced by political liberal philosophy, that while on one hand, I ain't got no love for white nationalists and all that kind of stuff. However, that doesn't preclude me from understanding what they are suffering ultimately from and missing. I do believe that these so-called white nationalists, especially these younger white kids, man, they are looking for a group. And for far too long, to be honest, they have partially been the victims of white liberalism that has infected a lot of our culture and society, that has made everybody into individuals. And that's why you hear white people say like, oh, I don't have any culture. No, you do have culture. Trust me. And you come from a people that had culture, right? Now, if that was stripped away from you or whatever, that's another conversation. So I see part of it is, this is what they're looking to try to reclaim, is a group identity. And I don't fault them for that. What I fault them for is that their group identity has to come with my, essentially living under their tyranny, or that I'm not cool with, right? But I don't fault them for wanting to be. And in fact, Quran says what? Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu. You old people, O mankind, we made you from a single man and woman, and then we also what we made you into shu'uban, a sha'ab and a qabila. We can get into slicing onions over what these mean, but essentially a group and a group, right? A bigger group and a smaller group, but a sha'ab. I think what is wrong with, or what's at the heart of all this white nationalist stuff, is that there are some white people that have been suffering from what I've called the lack of shu'ubiyah, the lack of being a sha'ab or a people. And they're lashing out, trying to get it back, but it's like, look, we didn't take it from you. Yeah. So this is where I would kind of come back at the white nationalists and look, black people didn't take it from you, Muslims didn't take it from you, Mexicans didn't take it from you, your own white brothers and sisters, your liberal, they took it from you. We didn't take it from you. Chinese people didn't take it from you. Y'all did it to yourself. right? This is something y'all need to have as an internal conversation and stop demonizing us and beyond demon, like stop, literally like, committing acts of violence as if like, well, we didn't take, like you guys took a whole bunch of stuff from people, right? We can get into that as a subsequent conversation. But I do believe part of it is at the heart is that they're suffering the malaise, the disease of no longer being a group. And wanting to have that back, I don't fault them for. Now, again, diversity isn't a problem, but it is a challenge, right? And we've seen like one of the problems or one of the challenges of Andalus, right? That so-called golden age of Islam in Spain was that there was actually diversity and they didn't know how to handle that. And we see that now with the American Muslim community. We have a level of diversity that is quite honest, like I think unprecedented in Muslim history. So what is it that's going to, that's why I think for me, at least in America, now if it's back in some other country, it may be a different, but at least here in America, I only see the way forward for American Muslims is going to involve intramarriage between the different ethnicities because we're just too small of a group, right? And there's no means of recreating, sort of transgenerational ethnic communities in America that are also going to hold on to Islam. It just ain't going to happen. Like your Pakistani-ness is going to fade away. Your Egyptian-ness is going to fade away. The only way forward is if we embrace, what the Prophet ﷺ said about, an Arab not having a preference over a non-Arab, a black over a white, vice versa, right? Going forward, I believe that that's the way forward. But we also need to embrace being a people. That will undoubtedly, look, we just got to accept that part of our sha'abness, part of our being a people is going to be American. A lot of us are very, very uncomfortable about being an American. And I don't only mean so-called immigrant Muslims. A lot of Black American Muslims also suffer from this uncomfortableness of being American. And that means you just got to kind of accept the good for the bad, but then you work on polishing the bad and refining the good, right? So yes, diversity will be a challenge for us, but we cannot live well without being a people. And in fact, I was talking with my friend Shakir about this, a couple of weeks ago, that I personally feel that one of the biggest reasons why the Black American community has suffered as much as it has over the last 60, 70, 80 years, essentially since Jim Crow ended, is because we lost all sense of being a people, right? One of the, I think I also wrote on social media the other day about, I said, I showed a little picture of, this is back when they were just beginning desegregation, right? So normally, I'm not opposed. It was just how it was conducted. Usually, desegregation, the way that it's taught in our education system, is seen as a positive. And I'm not saying it's not positive, but there were some consequences in the way they went about it. And I said, some may be incensed that desegregation wasn't 100% all positive as it was carried, meaning as how it was carried out. And that indeed it had an appalling effect on Black self-worth, especially Black femininity, as when contrasted with the dominant white culture. The result was that this left many Black folks, especially Black women, feeling that their beauty as a people was a very distant second best, if you understand what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. This is somewhat similar to the Muslim question, right? That somehow Islam is a very distant second best to Christianity, right? And therefore there's this lack of, and therefore the same way, do we want to integrate into America like how again, Martin Luther King said, like, I feel like my people are integrating into a burning building. Well, what was he talking about? Right? he was talking about, man, if you rush into this thing and do it without really making sure that all of the, all the pieces of the cogs are interlocked appropriately, this could have a disastrous effect. That's why, in the general, and I can tell you this from experience, Black kids that went to majority white schools, particularly Black girls, suffered the ugly duckling syndrome. Nothing was more, I saw it, nothing was more destructive to the development of a healthy Black, especially Black female self-esteem than going to a school where there was mainly majority white kids, because the subconscious agreed upon standard of beauty was what? Blonde hair and blue eyes. That means at best you're just gonna get, you can't even medal. You're not even gonna get a silver or a bronze. Like you're barely in the running. And that has a disastrous effect when those people then enter into adult life and all of the things that come out of that. That's why a lot of promiscuity in the Black community also has to do with just people looking for affirmation. Not only due to the absentee fathers, that's one part of it. It's also due to how their sense of self-recognized beauty was crushed, right? And seemed to be a very, very distant second. Same thing for that is going on now with Muslim kids, and therefore within the Muslim community. Talking about one of our diversity challenges, Dr. Jackson spoke about this, that one of the challenges of Black American Muslim kids going to Islamic schools where the dominant culture is going to be either Desi or Arab. If you're a Black kid and you go in, then you're also going to have the ugly duckling syndrome. And this is why a lot of Black American Muslim kids that went to Islamic schools also came out with jacked up things, with a jacked up sense of self-worth and self-beauty, right? So how are we going to integrate that, right? I mean, that's why I don't really put a lot of stock into Farrakhan. I think he's essentially a charlatan, right? But he did say something one time that was worthy of note, that he said, he did not want, he was for, obviously, segregation. And he said the reason why is I want the formative years of my Black child to develop in an environment where it's normal to be Black and it's beautiful to be Black. So when they mature and they meet the rest of the dominant society that is going to not be Black, they will be able to meet them on equal footing, because they will see themselves as an equal. Not that white people will see Black people as equal, but that Black people will see themselves as equals. This is also what is needed for the development of Muslim children, that Muslim children will come to see themselves as equal to their non-Muslim counterparts in terms of socially and civil, society speaking. The problem is, even going way back to in the beginning about professional development, the vast majority of Muslim schools are not run by professional educators that understand these things. They're just run by people with good hearts, but, as they say, good hearts don't fix no Chevys. You know what I mean? No, this is extremely important for people to understand. So yeah, diversity is going to be an enormous challenge.
I mean, just a totally off the side, non-topic thing. I was listening to this one lecture. Mentioned, I didn't know this, but Christopher Hitchens, right? Apparently, he has a brother, and I know that. But he said one of his speeches, and I've heard a lot of people say this. That despite all our despair and all that, like Christians are kind of acknowledging the only option. They've watered down so much that the only option left out there for a real religious experience is Islam. Like, even despite all our shortcomings and challenges and despair we feel that among ourselves, like Islam is like the only. I mean, just that one article I sent, like I was so amazed. Like,
Right.
in the Vatican, they're having like gay orgies, in the Vatican by high. I mean, I was like shocked. I mean, like that. What's? I mean, this is the.
I mean,
only
where else is, so especially if you have, you have these high ideals, right? These high moralistic, theological ideals. And if those collapse, well, where are you going to go to?
Yeah.
Right. Where's your refuge? Right. That's why it's important, going back to what I was saying earlier, we must be careful of, even though there is an objective black and white morality in Islam. Murder is wrong. Eating pork is wrong. Drinking wine is wrong. Gambling is wrong. Committing fornication. Okay, all that. Okay, there's a black and white objective morality, right? However, within the system of black and white objective morality is an insulation and padding of mercifulness that says, "Fattaqullaha mastata'atum," right? Obey Allah as much as you are able to, right? Or, alladina yajtaribun kaba'ir al-itham, those that do their best to avoid committing major sin, right? And that when they become angered, they forgive. فَإِذَا غَضَبُوا مَا غَضَبُوا.
Verse is that? First one, or
which
the one as much as you as best.
it's in Surah At-Taghabun. That is the 64th chapter and the 16th verse. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ وَاسْمَعُوا وَأَطِيعُوا وَأَنْفِقُوا خَيْرًا لِأَنفُسِكُمْ. And then the other one is from the 42nd chapter, the 37th verse. وَالَّذِينَ يَجْتَنِبُونَ كَبَائِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَالْفَوَاحِشَ وَإِذَا مَا غَضَبُوا هُمْ يَغْفِرُونَ. Those that avoid they work towards avoiding major sins. Because the form, it says يَجْتَنِبُونَ. So ijtanaba, right? The form of ifta'ala means that it's not going to be 100% perfect, right? So it's an effort, right? You make your best effort. وَالَّذِينَ يَجْتَنِبُونَ كَبَائِرَ الْإِثْمِ. Those that make a hard, earnest, best effort, right, to not commit the major sins, which means that Allah is saying that, okay, if you make your best effort to leave out the major sins, okay, the minor sins, all right, we're not gonna necessarily nickel and dime you here to death, right? That's a merciful, fluid, gracious system of morality inside of a black and white objective morality. That's what I mean about paradox.
Yeah.
Right? And one does not conflate the other. Right? One does not contradict the other. This is very, very important to understand.
Important message that people need to get right today.
This is huge, because what will often, so when you're saying about the stuff with the Vatican and people doing all this other crazy stuff, right? Well, when people feel that there's, one, they have some, and I know that Muslims don't like it, but one of the criticisms against Christianity is that there's like the lay people, especially in Catholicism, right? There's the lay people, and then there's the priesthood. The priesthood is supposedly like the super pious people. Well, the super pious people, if they're men, or women, the nuns, they can't have sex. So why, as you achieve some high level of piety and morality, you can't have sex? Guess what's going to happen with that eventually, to at least a number of you? You're going to go astray, right? And this is why, the companion said An-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam naha, right? He forbade celibacy, right? Now, there's a difference between not getting married, but then doing it with the intention of being celibate. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade this. And there's a wisdom to it because, look, man, at the end of the day, there's very few urges that are going to be more overwhelming than the sexual urge, right? And you need, at some point in your life, particularly when you're younger, to be able to fulfill that need. And if you don't, you're going to run amok at some point. You're going to run aground for most people if you are not able to fulfill that urge. Now, as you get older, it's slowly the fire begins to, right? But if you don't get that, man, you will go absolutely bananas, right? So, one, our system, I don't care how pious you are, right? The most pious of all human beings had 9 wives, right? The Prophet ﷺ had many, many wives, right? And this is where, again, you may not like this, internet liberal Muslims, but the Prophet ﷺ had many, many wives and enjoyed the pleasure of having many, many wives, right? I'm sorry, just that's a fact. And it's amazing. On one hand, if you're running around in the street and, excuse my language, just screwing everything under the sun, then somehow you're a free thinker and you're enlightened and you're free from the bonds of a brother, right? But if you decide to do polygyny with willing human beings, oh, you're in an oppressive system. No, I'm done with all of this nonsense, right? So I'm like, unapologetically, the Prophet ﷺ was a man who enjoyed the pleasure of women that include the sexual pleasure of women. End of story. None of that means that he was some sort of, philanderer or whatnot. I enough of all this nonsense. If people can't accept that, then they just don't accept Islam. Look, Allah will deal with you. That's above my pay grade. But if you have a system that does not allow people to have some kind of out, right, then they will generally run amok. I mean, this is one of the challenges of homosexuality, because guess what? There ain't no outlet for that. And that's why it is going to kind of jam you up. And even though now apparently you can't talk about any kind of therapy, because no longer can you classify apparently homosexuality as an illness, right? Which it used to be. Liberal internet Muslims, it used to be classified as a mental illness. Now you can no longer do so. But then the studies show they are extraordinarily unhappy as a group, and they are even more so than heterosexuals unable to sustain long-term relationships, right? But as a particularly though, beyond that, getting to this idea of achieving higher levels of morality, well, I mean, how are you going to do that if you can't let off some steam? How are you going to do that if it doesn't encompass within it mercy and compassion for your fragilities as a human being? So for us, our system of morality, even though it is black and white, it's also a lot more pragmatic. And that's extraordinarily important for, I think, the rank and file Muslim today to be educated in and to get that, yes, avoid the major sins. Even if you happen to trip into something major, Allah says he will forgive you, make your tawbah, and so on, avoid it, right? But if you can avoid the major ones, I'm not saying don't sweat the small stuff, right? Just, you make tawbah, but don't allow it to defeat you. But your method of being able to avoid the major ones you will have the best chance of success in a group. Nobody crosses the ocean hardly, man, on their own.
Yeah.
That's unrealistic. So I think I've tormented liberal Muslims online for one such. Even though I don't consider myself a conservative by any stretch of the means. I have major issues with conservatism as well. But I do have major problems with liberalism too.